Hey, LinkedIn, and welcome to Business Unusual. This is a live show where we talk about the ways coronavirus is impacting the way we work and the way we live. I'm Suzy Jackson. I am an editor at LinkedIn, coming to you live from my home in New York City. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about the environment. It is Earth Day. Happy Earth Day. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. As we talk on the show today, I want to hear from you. Are you joining us? Where are you joining us from? How are you celebrating Earth Day? What are you doing to think through this particular day and this really unusual time? Let us know in the comments. Use the hashtag business unusual when you share on LinkedIn. I definitely want to hear from you throughout the show. We're going to be coming to your comments as we talk with two great guests today. First, we'll be joined by Beth Gardner. She is an environmental journalist. And a little bit later, we're going to be joined by Natasha Daly, who is a wildlife writer. She's a staff writer and editor for National Geographic. Before we bring out these two wonderful guests, I wanted to just set the stage a little bit. We are a couple of months now into the COVID-19 crisis. For many in the business community, I feel like this really started to feel real about maybe 6 weeks ago when we started to see a lot of conferences being canceled and business travel being impacted. So there was a story I wanted to bring up here showing that by one industry estimate, business travel in the US at least is down about 92%. That even seems like a little bit not quite the right number. I'm not seeing anyone who is business traveling right now. But as a regular portion of travelers, the business community, if they're not traveling, that's a big hit on the airline industry. People aren't traveling in general, so there's a lot of flights grounded. The good news is that the air quality is getting better. But as we've seen across the world here, certain spots that have struggled with air quality in the past, now that people are staying home, they're not flying, they're not commuting, they're not driving to work, air quality has gotten a little bit better. But to look more closely at that, I actually wanted to bring in our first guest, Beth. Beth Gardner is the author of Choked: Life and Breath in the Age of Air Pollution. Hello, Beth. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Suzy. Great to be with you.
You have traveled to write this book. I mean, you're an environmental journalist, but to write this book specifically, you traveled to a lot of the places that are really known as the worst offenders for air pollution in the
Yeah.
world. Tell me, besides the obvious stuff we touched on, air travel is basically suspended, people aren't commuting. What are some of the other factors that go into air pollution? Why are we seeing an improvement in the quality right now?
Well, I think it's obvious, and most people would intuitively realize that a lot of air pollution comes from the transportation sector. So that's all the driving and flying that we do. It's the trucks and buses that carry us and our things around. And it comes also from factories, from production, whether that's coal powered manufacturing in China or anywhere else. So obviously, a lot of that stuff has been shut down because of what we all need to do to prevent this virus from spreading. And consequently, we are seeing pretty significant improvements in air quality in a lot of places. Now, that is very noticeable, for example, in London, where I live, and the streets are much clearer. This is normally a pretty air polluted place. But I also think that it's a little bit of a red herring to sort of focus too much on that because it seems pretty obvious that if you stop doing all the things that cause pollution, that pollution will go down a lot or disappear. But it's equally obvious that when all those things come back, when we're able to start reopening the economy and resuming normal activity, that we're going to see all that pollution come right back. And in fact, it may well exceed what it was before. That is already starting to play out in China as they loosen up some of their shutdowns. And I think another important thing to keep in mind is that this pandemic is illustrating the ways that air pollution harms our health. And like you said, I traveled around the world reporting my book about air pollution, Choked. And what I really learned from talking to scientists and meeting people who are impacted by this is that dirty air damages our health so much more profoundly and in so many more ways than I had realized. There's a very strong body of scientific evidence now that links air pollution to not just breathing problems, which you might expect, but really a very long list of health problems from, heart attacks and strokes to diabetes and much more. And what we're seeing now is that it's exacerbating the impacts of COVID-19. Death rates from the virus are higher in places where people over many years have been breathing dirty air versus places where the air is cleaner. So that really sort of, underlining something that's very worrying.
Very worrying. I just want to say hello to a few people who are joining us from the stream. Anka says Happy Earth Day from Toronto. We have Matthew who says Huzzah, the Earth. I kind of like that place, smiley face. And Dan says Happy Earth Day. Yes, the Earth needs a big rest. So you a rest. That's kind of a nice way to put it. I mean, lockdown is a word with connotations, and Dan is saying maybe we can call this a rest right now. It's costly. We have this lockdown. We have this opportunity for the Earth to rest a little bit. But as you're saying, it's
Yeah,
illustrative. This is not clearly the way that we would approach a change
right.
given the choices. But tell me a little bit about what we can learn, given that we are on this pod.
Yeah. So to be honest with you, I don't really like that idea very much, that we're sort of, that this is good for the planet in some way. It's something that I've been hearing a lot, that this is kind of a silver lining somehow, that the fact that air pollution and carbon emissions are going down. It's not a silver lining. This is not the way to achieve cleaner air. It's not the way to fight climate change. Pandemic is horrendous. We know so many people are dying and sick and afraid, and these shutdowns are just absolutely devastating, for the economy and for people's livelihoods and lives. Um, Having said that, I suppose you could look at what is happening and ask whether there's anything we can learn from it when the pandemic passes and the shutdowns start to get lifted, as to, are there better ways, are there more sustainable ways that we can achieve similar results? And I think that sort of comes back to the kinds of things we've known about for a long time, which is cleaner energy, solar and wind power as opposed to fossil fuels. It means better forms of transportation, better public transportation, more access to biking and walking, and cleaner cars. Shutdowns are certainly not the answer. They're causing so much suffering. And I think that people who care about air pollution and climate change, they don't care about them because of some kind of abstraction of the earth. They care about these things because we care about human well-being. So we need to think about better and more sustainable ways to achieve, some of these improvements in air quality and carbon
Yeah.
dioxide that we've been seeing.
These are some of the questions that we're getting from the stream as well. We have Hector who asks, what can be done to encourage business leaders to reduce, reuse, and recycle to use a sustainable approach as a part of restarting the economies in their respective countries? What are some things that we should be thinking about, Beth?
Sure. Well, I think that unfortunately there's a danger that this pandemic is actually going to make things worse for the environment. When you talk about reusing and recycling, we're actually seeing the plastic industry pushing really hard now to try to overturn or at least suspend some plastic bag bans and single-use plastic bans in a lot of places, sort of using, hygiene and the pandemic as a pretext for that. Um, and I think that is a risk. I think that in past recessions and in past crises, like the economic crisis 10 years ago, we saw afterwards that carbon emissions actually exceeded what they were before, because in these kinds of scenarios, you often see environmental and health protective regulations getting loosened in the name of, supposedly helping the economy or boosting business. We're already seeing a lot of that from the Trump administration in the US. I think some of the lessons going forward may be to do with maybe some of the parallels between the pandemic and the climate crisis that we face. I think the biggest parallel is that, both of these are things that scientists have been warning us about for many years, if not decades. And we have sort of, for the most part, not heeded those warnings. We're seeing with the pandemic that, in so many countries, our systems and our governments just were not ready for this. So if we can sort of take it as a warning to, try to accelerate our action to forestall some of the worst effects of climate change, that would be beneficial. And I think another parallel, just briefly, is that both the pandemic and the climate crisis are situations of exponential growth where the numbers and the problem just grows so quickly once it gets started. And I think we've learned from the pandemic that in that situation you actually have to act before it sort of seems from looking at the world around you like that's necessary. Shutdowns had to come into place before the intensive care units were overwhelmed. Otherwise, it would be too late. If you wait until you can see it happening, then it's too late to act. So that is the case for climate change as well. So maybe that's a lesson we can take from this tragedy that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, it is an interesting parallel. I mean, you still can't see the COVID-19 germ, but you can see the effects of it so much more
Yes.
rapidly than you can, as you're talking about the environment. Sometimes that takes decades for you to see an effect. And then for some people, the cause and effect isn't even direct. So I think this is an interesting way to kind of retrain how people might think of this. That could be a positive thing to take from this. We have Paneet in the stream. He says, Happy Earth Day to everyone. Kind of agreeing with what you're saying. Let's utilize this chance to acknowledge that nature has truly been hurting for a long time now. So you're saying you're not comfortable with the kind of reset rest moment, but saying this is stuff that's been happening for a while. And now this is a different chance for us to maybe learn how to address it in a different way or to understand its impact on us more directly. Nicholas has a question. He wants to know, how do we achieve a balance between people needing to provide for their families and keeping pollution down? He wonders if this is a good time for a reboot for more sustainable industries to come to the fray. What do you think about that? What sustainable industries should we be doubling down on? What is there a need for that maybe isn't available yet?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that what we've learned from this crisis and from the improvements in air quality is that when you stop burning fossil fuels, you get better air quality. You get cleaner, healthier air, and you also get a reduction in carbon emissions. So, obviously what we want to do is be able to live our lives and go where we want to go and work and support our families and all of that without burning fossil fuels to the degree we do today. So that means things like, wind and solar power, clean energy, which doesn't create pollution, doesn't create carbon emissions. And it means a better approach to transportation. That might be, depending sort of where you are, better public transportation. It might mean, Milan is, as they get ready to reopen, one of the worst hit places, obviously, they're adding bike lanes and they're widening sidewalks, pedestrianizing, so that people can get where they need to go without, putting gas in the car and everyone sort of driving their own vehicles. So I think that's what I would take away.
That's great, Beth. I'm glad there are good things to take out of this. We try to talk a lot in the show about trying to find some positives in this sea of anxiety and uncertainty. I would love for you to stay backstage. We have a lot of questions coming in.
Sure.
Maybe some more for you as we continue the show. But thank you so much for joining us. Maybe we'll bring you back out in a few minutes.
Great. Thanks. Great to talk to you, Susie.
Great, everyone. That was Beth Gardner. She is an environmental journalist and the author of Choked Life and Breath in the Age of Air Pollution. She's been across that topic for quite some time. So it's an interesting moment here where we're seeing air pollution drop, clearly because we're staying at home. But Beth outlining for us that isn't just quite as rosy as it seems. It's a nice moment to start with, but it's not going to kind of carry us through once everything starts to ramp back up. I wanted to bring out for my second guest, Natasha Daly. She is a writer and editor with National Geographic. And Natasha, welcome. Hello.
Hi, Suzy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. You are an award-winning wildlife reporter, and we have seen a lot of really feel-good viral stories about animals reclaiming the earth during this pandemic. They feel good. They're fun to like. They're fun to share. I hear people mentioning them as little bright spots throughout the day. But sorry, everyone, they're not all real. Natasha did some reporting on this for Nat Geo, and I wanted her to come to walk us through what's real, what's worth talking about, why is it actually not a great idea to be sharing these viral things that aren't true, even if it feels good. I've seen great videos of baby geese walking down the Vegas Strip. I hope that one's real. But Natasha, tell us what's going on here. Let's start with the dolphins in Venice. Tell us about what's going on with that story.
Yeah, so anyone who's been on the internet, on social media over the past several weeks, which a lot of us have more than usual, have probably seen these sort of viral animal stories going around of animals returning to places where they wouldn't normally be. You bring up the dolphins in Venice. That was one of the big ones that went viral pretty early on. Yeah, you can see the video right there. That was part of the social media post. Basically, the claim was that dolphins are returning or coming to Venetian canals now that everyone's inside social distancing. In reality, that video was shot in Sardinia, very far away from Venice. And some of those videos of the dolphins weren't even new. They're from 2017. So I think it's an example of a couple things. First of all, how willing people are to want to believe these stories about animals thriving while we're sort of retreating. I think that it really, while everyone was, feeling vulnerable, panicking, this is a horrific pandemic that's going on, the idea that there would be some sort of silver lining for someone, and the someone in this case is animals, I think was a really appealing idea for people. So to me, it makes sense why that got a ton of retweets and likes and shares. But the reality is that these dolphins were not there. There's so many other examples of these fake posts talking about animals reclaiming the environment that weren't actually true.
Yeah, and how about this one isn't from a wildlife point of view? It's the orangutan washing the hands. Can you tell me about this one? This is not a wild animal who's certainly learned to wash their hands, but it was still pretty impressive to people who believed that this orangutan had learned from watching her handlers that hand washing was so important right now.
Yeah, so this orangutan lives at a sanctuary in Florida, and a couple weeks ago, a post went viral on Twitter saying that this orangutan had watched her keepers washing their hands during the pandemic and had started to mimic that behavior, and they caught it on video. The real story is that video was actually shot back in November, showing the orangutan splashing around in water, but it got co-opted, and there was different messaging put on top of it by social media users claiming that it was related to the pandemic. So of course this went viral. People were saying, everyone should follow the orangutan's lead. So, I mean, again, this is just an example of a way that these animal stories have really sort of proliferated on social media, to a point that I think is very surprising.
Yeah, I think whether or not, I mean, that one was not real, but still a good message. Wash your hands. I mean, if orangutan's doing it, whether or not the provenance of that is accurate, wash your hands. Something else that people are doing more, if not, maybe they shouldn't be all the time, drinking. A lot of people, alcohol sales are way up. There was a story out of China that there were some elephants doing some drinking. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, that was another one that went around. It was a photo of elephants sort of passed out in a tea garden in China, and the story that went with it on the post was that, well, everyone's inside social distancing, these elephants came into a village, got drunk in a tea garden, and passed out. In reality, and it rang some red flags for me. So when I started looking into it, I realized pretty quickly that the story was not true. In fact, elephants frequently come to that village, but they did not get drunk. Those photos weren't even from that village where they were claimed to be. So, I mean, I think that it's overall the sort of theme, I would say, with all this is that it's interesting how, I guess, willing people are to believe that kind of animals are thriving when we disappear. But there are some real dangers to actually spreading these false stories. And it's funny, I when I debunked these stories, I got a lot of responses on social media saying, it's like, you just told us Santa Claus isn't real, or, why did you bother bursting our bubble? Who cares? Just let us have this. And, I talked to some conservationists about this because I wanted to know, does this stuff, is it harmless, or does it actually have a real impact? And what I found out is that actually these fake stories about animals thriving that aren't true can actually really harm conservation efforts for a few reasons. One is because in many cases, we have altered the environment of the planet to the point where it cannot recover without our intervention. So the idea that all we need to do in order for animals to sort of thrive and recover is to just go indoors and leave them alone actually really undermines active conservation work. And so it can make it sort of this false narrative that we don't have to do anything. We just have to like throw up our hands and everything will kind of recover itself. In reality, that's not true. And I think another major harm that spreading this stuff has is that conservationists say when people spread these stories thinking they're true and then they find out they're false, it can actually impede people's willingness to want to support conservation in general. So, you might feel tricked or betrayed that, you really wanted to believe this story and then you found out it wasn't true. And you may not be want to engage in future stories about conservation efforts. So it can have real measurable impacts that I think a lot of people just don't think about when they find out this stuff is fake, because, it seems pretty harmless overall to think a dolphin's somewhere where it actually isn't.
Yeah, I have some firsthand experience with that because in my household, we hadn't directly seen any of the tweets about the dolphins, but I think someone made a joke on Saturday Night Live or something, and like it reached that level.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God, the dolphins, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
when you and I were talking about this, my husband overheard us and said, wait, that wasn't real? He was devastated. He really wanted that to be real.
Yeah.
Of course, would be a great outcome from all this. But as you're saying, it actually makes the job of conservationists harder because of that kind of letdown people feel. Maybe it makes them distrustful of the next story that comes along, or less aware that the problems are really real and they're large. And
and I think it goes back to what Beth was saying a bit earlier, that the impulse to think nature's healing itself or nature's taking a break or animals are recovering when we go inside for a few weeks is just, it's really it's from my perspective, it's just not a good takeaway from all this. This is stuff that, even if, and I think the dolphins are a great example because the real story is that dolphins really are coming a bit closer to the docks in Sardinia because cruise ships and ferry ships aren't there like they normally be. But I think we have to ask ourselves, okay, does it really matter that dolphins are coming 20 feet closer than they would normally, and is this something to celebrate? I think people are really looking for stories to celebrate right now, and it's heartening that animals are bringing people joy, but I think we just have to take a step back and think, okay, what does this all really mean? Because it's very temporary.
Yeah. So again, so the dolphins coming closer to the dock, whatever. But tell me one good feel-good story. You were talking about the turtles. Tell me about that.
So a lot of people have been asking me, okay, well, if that stuff's fake, what's real? And so a good example of an actual real story that came out in the last few days, actually, there's an island in Thailand, Phuket, which is a huge tourist hotspot, and biologists on the island recorded 11 sea turtle nesting sites are actively nesting right now, which is the highest number in 20 years. So, I mean, I think this is it's a very true, measurable example about how this particular population of animals does seem to be thriving. It also makes a lot of sense because these beaches are hugely typically packed with tourists, and so it makes sense that they go away and we see more nesting sites. So I think this is an example of a true story that actually would have long-term measurable impact on the population of turtles on the island.
And that's great. I mean, we get to enjoy adorable baby turtle photos right now, but also know that this is something with lasting impacts that go beyond this. It's a real story, and it's something that is going to have effects beyond this COVID crisis, hopefully long into the future. I wanted to say hello to a few people joining us in the stream who are celebrating Earth Day. We have Jody from Punjab, India. We have Raphael from Boca Raton, Florida. Brendan, happy Earth Day from South Africa. And Feve, happy Earth Day from Kenya. It is great to see people all over the place joining us today to celebrate Earth Day and talk about the COVID-19's impact on the environment, both some of the good things that might come out of this and some of the things that might feel good but aren't so great if you look at them in the whole in this moment. I wanted to bring Beth back on quickly. Beth and Natasha, you both you're across this issue of in and out of this pandemic time. We have a lot of people who are just really happy to have been speaking with you today. Eshan also says praise to the park wardens doing amazing jobs maintaining parks. Mary says happy Earth Day. We have to help save this beautiful planet. I notice there's more beauty in this world by relaxing and taking time to be with the earth. Just give me some parting thoughts. Beth, to you, what is something you're going to take from this that's a positive? You were telling me about bicycling around London, how that might change, and Milan as well.
Yeah, like I said, I live in London, and I actually took an amazing bike ride this morning into the center of the city, places I would never normally go, both because the air quality is usually terrible. You get these huge facefuls of fumes, and because I'm terrified of, getting mowed over by an SUV or a truck or something. So I think there are some questions to ask about whether any of what any of these changes can be can stay with us after the pandemic. Like you said, Milan is talking now about installing new bike lanes and pedestrianizing roads, because they say that it's time now to start planning for what life is going to be like afterwards and to make it better. They also know that people are probably going to be a little bit afraid of public transportation because of virus transmission. So making it easier to cycle and walk is great. I think what's going to be significant is whether that is just an isolated case. Is it a handful of cities, in different places that make those kind of changes, or are other cities like London, where I am, like other cities in the United States, maybe going to try to follow in Milan's footsteps to see what happens there? We know they're a little ahead of the curve in terms of pandemic than other places, so they may be opening sooner. And are other cities going to start making those kinds of changes too? If that happens, then maybe at that point we'll be able to say that there were some lessons learned, and there were some ways in which people and different cities and countries took something positive away from this terrible situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, we see Sylvia in the stream telling us that she too purchased a bicycle. So maybe biking is the way to go.
Yeah.
It feels like a safer thing to be doing right now. Get some fresh air too. Natasha, what about you? What's one thing positive that you're going to take away from this insane situation?
Well, it's heartening that people seem to care so much about animals and wildlife and are really cheering them on. I think that something that is heartening that's sort of come from a pretty tragic situation is, the fact that people are realizing that, this pandemic is, the virus is a zoonotic disease. It did spring up and really sort of take off in a wildlife market where live animals were being sold for food. I think that people are realizing a lot about maybe the wildlife trade and the way that we, use the resources of our planet in ways that are responsible, much more than they were before. So I think that the fact that the wildlife trade issues around it is really sort of entering mainstream conversation is a really positive thing, because people are just sort of opening their eyes and thinking, okay, if we want to prevent this from happening again in the future, we really want to think about how we're using our planet's animals and resources.
That's a great point. I think you're certainly right about that being more prominent in the conversation than it certainly was before this. Beth, Natasha, thank you so much for joining us today. I think the stream really loved what you had to say. We had a lot of great questions and comments. A lot of people joining us from all over the place who care about this topic. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.
And thank you all for joining us. It was wonderful to see you popping up from many, many countries around the world to share your day with us, share some time. We are here live from the LinkedIn editors page 5 days a week at noon Eastern. I hope to see you back here tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe.